Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Seeking Play. In today's episode, we were joined by the incredible Dr. Troy Innocent. Dr. Innocent is an urban play scholar, artist, game maker, and director of the Future Playlab at RMIT University in Melbourne. Troy has 25 years' experience in gallery-based exhibitions, symposia, and site-specific projects, developing augmented reality games that blend physical objects with digital interfaces to reimagine everyday urban environments in playful ways. Troy is the co-creator of 64 Ways of Being, an urban adventure platform combining audio walks and mixed realities to situate players in new experiences of place.
We watched back our conversation with Troy and took three quotes we really loved. The first is, play is about entangling people into ways of thinking and making that are unfamiliar. The second is, play creates a way of being that shows that there might be another possibility, and who knows what that might be. And the third, play is so connective and creative. This sense of energy and possibility with other people brings me back into this space. We loved chatting with Troy. He was incredibly open to just building Lego on the fly, not having anything pre-prepared. And Jane and I have spoken about this a lot, how progressive the Future Playlab is. And just putting a shout out to any university that doesn't have one. You need one. You need to bring play, within the fabric of your university, and then bring it into the city and town that you're in. This is really progressive, and we really admire the work that Troy and all the team are doing there. Take care, folks.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second season of the Seeking Play podcast. We are very excited to have Troy Innocent as our guest on this morning's podcast. Troy, we are absolutely delighted to have you here. You're very welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. Happy to be here, all the way from Melbourne.
All the way from very sunny Melbourne. Yes, it's a beautiful evening in Melbourne. So, Troy, I am going to kick things off by, can you share with our listeners, what were you like as a kid?
Yeah, right. Great question. I mean, and I have, for various reasons, been looking back on this recently. So, I mean, as a kid, I was obsessed with Lego. And so, I mean, one story that my parents like to share is that at one stage I had this vision for a Lego city. So I took the mattress off of my bed and tossed it to one side and just used the entire bed surface to build this Lego city. So I think world building was in my certainly part of what I did as a kid. It was very much about kind of building fictional worlds and being within them in all different ways. I did this outdoors as well. So I grew up in a time when you were allowed to just go outside and do whatever you felt like and come back for dinner. And so, we lived in an area of Melbourne that was being developed. So I'd go out in the bush, I'd go out into building sites, rubbish tips, all kinds of environments, probably what you call now risky play. But of course learned from my environment. I would say I did a lot of that, very direct. There's no, as far as I know, no dangerous animals, living in Australia. That's what everyone thinks, that as soon as you leave your house, you're going to be assailed by all kinds of venomous snakes and
drop bears.
That's right. Yeah. But yeah, there are a lot of lizards and other things around. Where we grew up, there was a number of kind of rivers and parks and open areas of bushland we spent a lot of time in.
I think that's a perfect segue into my question, is that, throughout those wonderful years, they sound like formative years, we naturally, as kids, there's a bump or a bruise or a scrape or a break. But do you think, or like a particular adventure that you end up on, do you think, looking back, that formed a sense of identity of who you are now?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is a much longer story and a completely different tangent. But I have been spending, just by chance, a lot of time with my parents at the moment talking about my childhood, because and just saying how appreciative I was of them creating what was a, I guess what you call, I don't think they would call it that, but a safe space for experimentation with who you were. And they did that intuitively, because I don't know, it's just who they are. And so, yeah, definitely though, that sense of autonomy of just going outside and playing. I mean, I did some stupid things as well. We lived on a hill, and I had a BMX bike. And one time I just thought, what happens if I don't use the brakes? And so I just went down the hill until I crashed at the curve and went flying onto the grass. And okay, well, now I know. So,
Now you know. No.
yeah.
Yeah. You know what? Like I think this is you even kind of reference it now. It's called risky play. We've attached the risk element, and from series one, there's been one or two people who referenced like, no, that's just play. And how many kids have the question you had now? I wonder what, but they've never seen it through. They've never done that. They've never actually taken that risky step into the unknown. And that, I'm sure it has to translate to, like, as an adult, as you start to go through your life, that will I? No, that kind of like tipping point of will I take a risk or not? And yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like, do you think in any way this kind of like childhood consideration of taking on a piece of risk can travel as we go on, and maybe make us more risk adverse as adults?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't work with children often in terms of play research, but I am across a lot of the thinking around how bounded that activity is now. And so that's how I came across that term risky play, because it's a term that comes from, I guess, mostly Scandinavian countries, that challenge the constraints put on play. I mean, I guess that would be really interesting if there are any kind of longitudinal studies on people who have grown up maybe in the last couple of decades, who might be teenagers or young adults now, around their perceptions of the world in relation to childhood. I mean, it's a pretty tricky question, because at the same time, the world that young adults are facing now is vastly different than the world that I faced as a young adult. I went to raves and did all kinds of, I guess, things that were risky for a young adult. That and there's no mobile phone, there was no way to contact anyone. You just were out there in the world, and you had to figure everything out for yourself. But at the same time, there wasn't this sense of existential dread in the air everywhere that you went. So, maybe there's a bit of a contrast there.
Yeah.
Troy, can I ask you to think back to when you were starting out your career? So is there any piece of advice that you'd give to your younger self, either about being more playful or more serious in the way that you interacted with others?
So yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question if I take it from a very personal perspective, because I was very playful as a young adult. So to give you an example, just because I shared this recently with somebody, when I went to university, I mean, I also took a lot of things very literally. We had an art, so I studied design originally, but I never really practiced as a graphic designer, because I moved immediately into multimedia design after that, and was actually quite, what's the word for it? Disillusioned with the design culture that was around in the late 80s, early 90s when I was studying, which was very much focused on, products and advertising and psychological manipulation of people to sell things. And so, and that didn't align with the values that I grew up with. So, but to give this example of, and this is perhaps also going to segue into something that is advice, which is, just experiment and explore, and don't always, kind of be bounded by what you think the rules are. I mean, that sounds really cliched, but I'll give you an example. We had this art history lecturer who was very inspiring, She said, well, rather than research and present an art movement, perform an art movement. And so I was assigned Dada, and at the time I was very interested, along with some colleagues, or kind of in cyberpunk and electronic art and all the kind of stuff that was happening in the early 90s. So I said, okay, I'm going to do cyber Dada. And and I took it all the way. I formed an alternate identity as this Russian avant-garde artist, dressed up as her, came in, put on a kind of TB 303 baseline and created a whole sense of noise and multiple projections, and threw objects around the room, created a complete mess. And, I've got a high distinction. So it's kind of like, it's exactly what that particular lecture was after.
Cool.
But I didn't really think it through. I mean, which sounds like bad advice maybe, because, it was kind of, that was my instinct. And I thought, well, yeah, sure, let's do it. And we ended up writing a manifesto, the Cyber Dada Manifesto, which is still online somewhere. When I say we, myself, another student, Dale Nason. And then we were showing work all around the world. So yeah, it's kind of a really good kind of way to kickstart a career, even if the director of the design school was not in favor.
Yeah, I think it's so important as well about trusting your instinct as well.
I was going to say that.
Especially as you get older, because when you're younger, I think, as you said, sometimes, we don't overthink everything, but just naturally, as you get older, you do, sometimes get stuck in decisions, and in that moment, you are overthinking, and sometimes we don't follow our gut and we don't trust our gut. And yeah, I completely resonate with what you're saying, 100%.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I was actually going to reference your parents as well, because you said intuitively they understood. So you, like, intuition has come out in two questions. You said intuitively they understood what I needed as a kid, and now you're talking about your intuition. And I would say, again, I'm not a psychologist, but like maybe that intuition that has been retained from your parents passing it to you, being passed on. And I suppose, yeah, that's the challenge in any academic kind of forum, is that how do you teach intuition? How do you help students to go with that sense of self when you're being bombarded with theorists who are, the ones you should follow and learn from? That's not a question for you. That's a different.
Yeah, no, it's a challenge for everyone. Yeah.
Then in your kind of day-to-day work, like, are you conscious of striking a balance between taking your work seriously, but then trying to not take it seriously, or vice versa?
Yeah. So the work that I do day to day is in this space here, the Future Playlab at RMIT. I'll give you a really, really, really brief history. I moved to RMIT in 2019 as a research fellow, coming into this field of urban play. And of course, what happened is, well, actually, it's quite fortunate that that first year I was traveling a lot, because I was traveling a game that I made called Wayfinder Live, which is about exploring urban spaces. And took that to Singapore and Aarhus and Tampere and Barcelona, which was very good, because the following year we had started two years of lockdowns. So I established this lab 1 month before the first Melbourne lockdown, and then we came back in 2021 and have been kind of just, it's been hectic the last 2 years making things. So coming back to your question, yes, really this is a messy making space. So it's about both analog and digital play. So day to day, I mean, I have to, because I'm running the lab, it's my responsibility. I'm responsible for people, both PhD candidates, but also research fellows and contractors who are delivering projects for local government. But at the same time, we have to, well, I mean, we don't have to, but because often, I guess you could just do the same thing over and over again. But I like to in each instance challenge ourselves with creating new responses to this idea of urban play. So a lot of the time we are experimenting, and we have a couple of different methods for that. So we use musical instruments a lot, as well as, more traditional, building things out of Lego, workshops, but a lot of digital prototyping as well. And this is one of the things that attracts me to analog modes of play, even though some of the things that we make are completely digital. We do a lot of mobile kind of location-based game design. But with analog play, you're able to physically embody and experiment and do things. At the end of the day, the performance of the lab is not only measured by, the research grants and the public impact, but also writing, long articles and papers and so forth. So yeah, that's when I guess it gets more serious, because you're then sitting at a desk trying to translate all of this stuff that's happened into the world into 8 pages of writing or something like that. So yeah.
Yeah, yowzers. Like I can only imagine that is the challenge. And even to pitch for funding with dedicated outcomes, everything is generally outcomes based. To have
well, especially with local government. I mean, the big thing with, I don't know if this is the case where you are, but post-pandemic, there's a lot more openness around exploring possibilities and temporary solutions and experiments and prototypes. But yeah, you still have to measure, do surveys, say, oh, this is going to be the public benefit, all of those types of, so by way of example, our major project at the moment is a 3-year study on the impact of urban play and creative placemaking. And the reason that we're doing that is that, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, but there are no kind of really large scale studies of, well, what is the impact on community? What is the impact on urban life? What is the impact on urban design? So we're doing that in locations both here in Melbourne, but also in Aotearoa or New Zealand, in a city there, Otatahi, Christchurch, and comparing those 2 cities, which have both had, Otatahi has had a slew of disasters, the 2 earthquakes, the terrorist attack, as well as COVID. We've been through 2 years of lockdown here, so it's looking at those kinds of issues.
Like, we're going to get into the future Play Lab even more, but for us, just to commend the work that's happening. It's just so, we feel it's so progressive and so needed. So yeah, I just want to, any listener thinking about leaving right now, hang in there. We're going to talk about your Play Lab a little bit more, because it's such a phenomenal space and so needed.
There's more Lego coming soon.
We got Lego.
Yeah. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Yeah, exactly.
So Troy, can I ask you about the term adult playfulness, and what would that mean to you?
Yeah, so this is a great question, because it's something that is really hard to explain, because there are so many, well, first of all, I'm sure that you're across this, and there's so many kind of cliches or misconceptions around it. So one is, oh, it's just about adults being silly and it doesn't really matter, and it's a bit infantile or something like that, or it's about, gamers, doing a hardcore game, kind of playing games and that type of thing. But really, so a lot of the inspiration, I draw my inspiration from a number of different sources, but Bernie DeKoven is a major inspiration, the new games movement. There's also, Jerry Storms, who made a lot of musical games. So these are all kind of from the 70s. So and I have these distinct, actually I don't want to go back to that question, but I have a couple of distinct childhood memories of playing new games in a park, of seeing bark paintings in a gallery. So because a lot of the work that we're doing in the Future Play Lab is looking at this question from the point of view of First Peoples or Indigenous people's knowledge, because there is I don't think that it is often termed as adult play, and that could also be highly problematic in terms of trivializing the types of cultural practices there. But it is this, that's how I view adult play, as this kind of embedded connectedness with the world that's open and curious and in a state of possibility. And adults play very differently to children, because So I mean, many people have written about this, but one of the first books that came up was Mary Flanagan's book on critical play, around how adults are able to be critical about their play, and so therefore it can become part of a conversation or a task. It can also just be play for the sake of play, but that is a big difference, is that capacity to be critical and to reflect upon it.
That's a wonderful answer. Thank you so much. This is season 2. Season 1, we had a lovely range of guests, and we've taken specific quotes that they had in relation to play, and you chose 2 that connected with you. So I'm going to go. So Di Gamage, she's the author of Playful Awakening. Her quote was, "Adult playfulness is about being present, to not jump to conclusions, to be curious so you can shift your perspective." So why did you choose that one, Troy?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that hit me straight away, because part of the research that we're doing in the lab in relation to urban play is how we can situate speculative design methods directly in relation to the world. And so I'm sure you're familiar with speculative design, around this idea of kind of inverting the design brief, where instead of designing for the world that we're in now, you imagine a possible world and say, well, what would be a design brief coming from that world? And often this is done in a design studio, in a kind of theoretical space, often with real world outputs, such as objects or kind of but what we're interested in, and this is why this quote connected with me, is how some of the playful methods that we situate directly, out there in the street, in the world, in places around Melbourne, for example, are able to look at that. So a project that we ran earlier this year during Melbourne Design Week was thinking about a particular suburb in Melbourne, because Collingwood, which is probably well known as a kind of hipster enclave, but we're looking at it. Well, what would this be like? What would this place be like in 2050? So because Melbourne at that stage is on track to become a mega city, which sounds exciting, because anyone who's spent any time in Melbourne be like, yeah, Melbourne's bigger than Sydney finally. So, but of course, it will come with all of these issues and problems around infrastructure and climate crisis and all of those types of things. So that's what I'm interested in, is well, how can we look at the spaces that we already live in and imagine other ways that they could be.
That's beautiful. So we lived in Melbourne for 2 years, and part of my onboarding, this was totally unofficial. This was the unofficial part of the onboarding. Within my first week, people had asked me within the first day or two, so who are you going to, is it called barrack? Who are you going to barrack for? Is that the word?
Yeah.
Who are you going to barrack for? I was like, what's that mean? First of all, and they were like, who follow? I was like, I don't know. And they were like, follow. And I started getting, in day one, I was been told, this is who you follow. By Friday, somebody had brought in a Collingwood jersey, put it on my desk, and they said, you now follow the Crows. I was like, hey. So, but that is the love of play. That's the energy that we got from especially Melbourne as well. So there is that love of play in the fabric of the city, and it's something we've never.
Okay, it's good that came across. Yeah,
100%, absolutely. And how you can compress the MCG down to the G, which just
right.
Playful. Very playful in terms of like, let's shrink it down to one letter.
And what's super interesting about AFL, because everyone just trying to figure out, where did this game come from? It's so random and weird in relation to other forms of football. It actually comes from an Indigenous game. So it's a game that's tens of thousands of years old. So it's a game called Manguk, which doesn't have the same competitive rules, but it has the same essential mechanics.
Wow. And I would say there's definitely overlaps between our native sport, or one of ours is Gaelic football. And there is a transition for Irish footballers who go to Australia to play that sport as well. I did watch it. I'm not manly enough or strong enough to play. Too old as well. Well, whose question is it now? I've been lost in your answers. They're wonderful. Second, Savannah Vice. Savannah's quote, Savannah has, just the listeners for season 2, go back and listen to Savannah's interview as well. Just wonderful. For her master's, she produced a body of work that helps people, but ordinarily students, consider the ecological challenges that they have in a more playful way. So wonderful resource. And Savannah's quote is, "Play embeds hopefulness and joy, which is really important when working towards a more socially and ecologically just future." So why did that resonate, Troy?
Yeah, well, this is originally pre-pandemic. This was just going to be the urban play lab, but as problems in the world escalated, I guess, for want of a better term. And also through some of the collaborations that were happening, back in 2019, 2020, shifted the focus to be really around this idea of the future play lab. So, exploring future forms of play, but really also how play could inspire other possible futures. And I became really deeply involved, or kind of, I went down the wormhole of speculative fiction, and this was also in relation to, I started to explore this idea of post-humanism, which I don't think we have time to discuss now, but it's super interesting. And essentially, this kind of middle position, or this alternate position, came about. So in terms of speculative fiction, we have the dominant trend of dystopian fiction, where it's every person for themselves. Then we have this genre of noble bright, so where you have a hero or heroes or some kind of other power come in to save the day. And then somebody came up with this thing called hope punk, which was really around how you just kind of, it's a bit like what Donna Haraway calls staying with the trouble, just accepting that there's a crisis, and seeing what we can do about it, and saying, well, okay, we can't throw our arms up in the air and just go, well, it's over. It's that's the dystopian position. It's kind of every person for themselves. We can't wait for, something to save the day. What can we do collectively? And so this is when I started to explore play, and also play from the perspective of Indigenous peoples who have, there's a couple of really great books about how, because we might as well mention the A word, the apocalypse, the idea that of course, a lot of our First Nations peoples have been through an apocalypse because their culture has been almost entirely, or in some cases, wiped out, or they've been displaced from the kind of their nation has been kind of erased from the map. But then if you start to look into Indigenous cosmologies, there's a lot of iterative beliefs around worlds, around that, the end of one world is the beginning of the other, which is very, very different to Western thinkings around the end of the world and there's nothing else. So this is my really long way of coming back to that quote, because play does create. I mean, I'm not saying that it's going to solve all of the world's problems. That's definitely not what I'm trying to say, but it creates perhaps the kind of way of being that shows that there might be another possibility, and who knows what that might be. And it's certainly better than just going, well, there's nothing we can do. And so, when I saw that, I thought, that's exactly what we're trying to do. I'm not saying we're successful, but that's certainly our main goal in the work that we're doing in the Future Play Lab, is to look at playful ways of being that are, fun and playful and inspiring, and perhaps healing and regenerative, but also might inspire other possible worlds.
Fantastic.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
So, Troy, I'm going to ask you if you could explain your work to a 5-year-old. So this is always a very interesting question. So if I were to ask you, could you explain your work to a 5-year-old? How would you answer this?
Yeah, I saw that question, and I actually have a 5-year-old niece coming to visit from Japan soon, and they might visit the lab. So I guess this is a good rehearsal for that. how would I explain it to a 5-year-old? I mean, so 5-year-olds are already kind of super aware and curious and understand the world in so many ways. But why would you explain that you have a whole research lab at a university that's looking at play? I mean, it probably wouldn't be that much different to the answer I just gave, which is to say that part of the job of adults is to help make the world, and the world is not always the way it should be, and so we're playing with other possibilities, and some of them might work, some of them might not work, but it's the same as the type of play that you're doing. It's just as serious as that. You're kind of figuring out how to be in the world, and that's what we're doing here as well, but working with other people to do that.
I love
Wonderful.
it.
Yeah.
It's always interesting when we bring our kids to our office. It's
We have a
surrounded
7-year-old
by Lego and Python walls, and I hope we haven't conditioned them to think that this is every office.
Well, we have a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old. I think the 7-year-old, as she's getting older now, kind of understands that it's not just us playing Lego all day at work. But when our little boy asks me, "Oh, where's Daddy?" I'm like, "Oh, he's at work," and he says, "Yeah, he's playing Lego."
Kind of
Yeah, it's very interesting.
So future Play Lab. Again, we said we're definitely coming back to it. Like, Troy, can you talk a little bit more about it? If you think there's anything that you didn't cover previously talking about it, and also you in it, like what is it that you love doing or bringing to the world in the future Play Lab's existence?
Well, I mean, we love making things for one thing, but really it's the kind of the community that emerges around that. So project, maybe because I haven't mentioned this as yet, we've developed this, but it connects to all of the things we've been talking about before, is a kind of urban play school. So it's teaching young adults how to play again in the world, and also looking at how that play can be part of the life. Well, it's now a very dark campus, but the campus that's here in the center of Melbourne, and how that might bleed over into the real world. So so that's what I really enjoy seeing is, I mean, the main thing, because my background and my core is, even though I'm an academic and I write about this practice, my core is as a maker. So it's really, I mean, like we're just saying, building Lego, of course, that's great, but then building with big pieces of Lego that are out there in the city. So we developed this with a couple of, so I work across a lot of different schools within the university. I'm based in the School of Design, but I collaborate with architecture and urban design and art and media and communication and education and so forth. So those types of interdisciplinary collaborations are always the most productive and enjoyable. So the project that I'm thinking of here is, we had a I don't know if you call them these, called the where you are, but parklets, these little kind of pop-up outdoor dining areas.
Yep, we have them.
Yeah. So we made our own, and we traveled it around the city, and it became this pop-up festival wherever it went. And so working with musicians and other people within that space, and I mean, going back into just being in that flow state of creative play, of making something. So you sometimes, for various reasons, sometimes due to just, we've had so many projects on the last 2 years, you arrive and you have a loose idea of what you're going to make, and then you go into it, and then 2 hours later you've created something, and people are engaging with it, and you're kind of exploring and iterating the design, and that is hugely enjoyable. And what we're doing now about understanding, through bringing sociologists and ethnographers and so forth into the mix as well, to understand, I guess, in a more systemic way, what those impacts are and what those methods are. I mean, that takes a bit more time, but that's also kind of really rewarding, because you start to see how, all the things we're talking about, how adults play is different to how children play, and how valuable that is as an activity, for so many reasons.
You've been involved in some fantastic projects, Troy. Can I ask you what have been some nice surprises along the way since you have started in your role at RMIT?
Yeah, so one of the most I guess it's surprising, but I would say mostly it's been a huge learning for me, is that through 64 Ways of Being, this project that we developed around taking people on journeys through public space. And so essentially it's a mobile app that combines immersive audio with augmented reality to tell stories, multi-layered stories about place. And so part of the process of making that involved working through the complexity of what Melbourne is, because sovereignty was never ceded. So even from a legal perspective, we're in two places at once. So we're in Australia, but we're also in the Kulin Nation, because so when I started working on 64 Ways of Being, worked and still continue to work with Ngawi Carolyn Briggs, who's a Boonwurrung elder, but situates her practice and cultural knowledge very much in an urban context. And so she has really embraced this kind of idea of urban play and brought very, very surprising perspectives to it in relation to, so the key, I guess, way to key surprise, or I mean, it's not even a surprise, it's just kind of a, whoa, that was dramatic, the lighting changed.
There we go.
So here's what came from that is just an understanding or an appreciation of how all of these kind of tricky things that we're doing with creative technologies like mobile phones and IoT and smart cities and so forth, in principle, are the same as what Indigenous people have been doing for tens of thousands of years, which is connecting knowledge to place and embodying knowledge in relation to place. And so, when that kind of, I guess, penny dropped, as it were, for me, it was, oh, okay, now a whole lot of growing up in this place, Australia, what we now call Australia, makes so much sense to me. And I'm really appreciative for Maui for sharing that knowledge. And so yeah, that was unexpected, but very, very valuable lesson.
Right. Could you just give us an example of, like, so if you have the app open, I imagine you have your phone. What's just one interaction on 64 Ways of Being? And also, why 64? Is it literally, you tell me, why 64?
Yeah. I mean, well, it's so people ask that question. But also it's like what is it? 100 words, 101 words for snow, or sorry. Yes, it's that type of thing. So in urban environments, we kind of tend to think of things in these modular ways. So it's possibly 64, but of course the vision for it is to capture all of the languages that are spoken in Melbourne, which is way more than 64. It's probably more like 300 or 200 or something like that. But to think about, well, okay, there are multiple ways of being in the world. And so just coming back to what I was saying, the one experience, for example, because we're in Melbourne, this city used to be a massive wetlands. And so there's still all of these water flows happening through the city. And in fact, when you kind of start the journey, you start at a high point and you gradually flow towards the river, what most people call the Yarra River or the Birrarung. And so there's a moment 2/3 of the way through, where you arrive at a tram stop. So Melbourne has lots of trams. at an intersection where there's this flow of people and trams and cars and all kinds of things happening around you, but we wanted to create this still point. So leading up to it is an immersive audio track where you hear Nawi Carolyn Briggs talking about how eels flow underneath the Elizabeth Street. So this is well, some people call it an urban myth. Others say there is actual evidence, but there certainly are enough kind of waterways underneath the city for this to happen. And so you hear this eel story, and then you open up your phone and start to see abstract geometric eels floating around in between the people, the trams, the cars, and so forth. And so it creates this moment of stillness in the busyness of the city and tries to kind of center you and take you into another world. And then immediately you're invited to go through the underpass and then walk along the river. And so this is the idea of this app is, of course, augmented reality can be super gimmicky and just like a bit of a spectacle, but the idea is to situate the experience in a context or in a meaning that relates to that particular place. Mm-hmm. So that's the experience that we offer people at that location.
Wow, that's fantastic. Let's get a little bit analog. Let's get a little bit touchy-feely here, because you very kindly built out. We threw a little curveball at you like we do to our guests. And we asked you the question, second question you opted for. How do you think your work helps people think and feel differently about the world? So can you show us your beautiful Lego build? And can you talk us through that? How do you think your work helps people think and feel differently about the world?
Yeah. So, I mean, I just happen to have this on hand, this Serious Play kit, because we used it for a workshop, which was really about creative placemaking. So we were kind of asking people to build their possible imaginary versions of a new part of the campus that's being reimagined. So I guess, I don't know, I just have been playing with it as I talk. I mean, I built this crazy construct to this I don't know, dystopian person who maybe has a funny hat. And but the thing that I first,
I'm gonna pick up on that. Like, why dystopian? Kind of, if I'm not putting you on the spot, like what does that mean to you in terms of the hat and the dystopian reference?
Oh yeah, I mean, because he's going back to those whole cyberpunk thing. I guess he's kind of like a kind of mechanical construct as opposed to what I built first, which is this a little elevated space, and which is really representing this idea of I guess elevating people or kind of situating them at different points of view in an urban environment. So if you imagine this up in, I don't know, the northern end of the campus, maybe it's a place for people to kind of give speeches from. There's some, I don't know, this is the kid coming out, these laser beams. I was a Space Lego fan. I wouldn't attribute too much meaning to this because it is something I've just been kind of playing with. I also made this blue cube of possibility that's just kind of, I like it. But I mean the thinking around this is I think fairly it's just been what's been happening in my subconscious while we've been talking, really.
Tinkering the way
based on what's here on the table. So
you very kindly you said, hey, I've got Lego, because there's a whole process. We end up having to post it to you, and you got to spend an hour, and you just said, hey, look, I just got Lego, what's the question? You built it out partially, and you said you'll tinker to the end. So it was very brave of you. You could have said no Lego, no needed. Needed, but thank you for that. I think that's us. I think that's it.
I would just finally like to ask Troy, just before we wrap up, if I was to ask you, Troy, what keeps you curious and motivated about your role? Just like to maybe finish on this.
Yeah. I mean, definitely that sense of possibility. One thing that certainly is inspired me and keeps me motivated is that, I mean, I didn't know what would happen when we set up a lab at the university, but we have attracted a lot of people who are just curious with experimenting with play. So, I mean, I can share you this video of some of the outcomes of Urban Play School, because we're able to transform this central space of the university into a pop-up urban play festival for 4 days over Melbourne International Games Week. But more importantly, all the student games were now have been adopted as part of campus life. So they're going to keep happening, keep running, keep kind of operating over the next couple of years. So I mean, what brings me in here every day is that possibility of, I mean, it's a bit strange, really. I don't know. I started my career very much in a pretty digital space, often making things in a fairly individual capacity. So I was, developing VR projects and that type of thing. And then play, well, this is what I've been doing for the last 25 years or so. So is so collaborative and connective and, I mean, dare I say, creative. So many things are creative, but it's that kind of sense of possibility, that energy with other people that, brings me back into this space. So, because people who knew me back in the early days probably would call me a bit of an introvert, but yeah, certainly don't always, sometimes, yeah, I like my alone time, but pretty much enjoy playing well with others, is what I enjoy doing now.
I love that, playing well with others.
That's beautiful.
Can I just infer?
But don't attribute that quote to me, because that's actually Bernie de Koven's philosophy.
No. Sorry, Bernie. It's Troy's now. But not to keep you too long, but it was a point you made, and this is something I think about Playlabs as they start to become more common in academic settings, is you might hear oftentimes that change happens on the margins, and I think that, and so it's not the center, it's not the obvious where everyone is specifically looking. You just mentioned that you're connected to multiple different departments, and so it feels to me like, correct me if I'm wrong, but like you are the department of interdisciplinarity. It feels to me like you're the thread, the playful, non-threatening thread that actually is bringing departments together. And is there anything in that? Because that's how we would kind of conceive of Playlabs, not being threatening to other academics and other departments who ordinarily don't communicate, but you're that thread and you really are the change on the margins. Is there anything in that, or is that just naive speculation?
No. I think it's definitely there. I mean, so there's some risks. I think we've talked about this, of people trivializing play. And in fact, I was meeting with someone today about, we're putting this new grant application in, and should we even use the P word? Because probably be doing play, but will it, if it's in the title, will that discounted as not being serious? But at the same time, play is a way in because it can be disruptive and generative, and I mean, this is a strategy that goes right back to, well, there's probably precursors before this, but the Situationists and others from last century of using play as a kind of a way to disrupt and create social change. Because it's almost a kind of a camouflage or a kind of like, let's just play with this possibility, and then suddenly that becomes a social norm, and it go right back to some of the original play scholars like Hausinger and so forth, who wrote Homo Ludens, which has recently been challenged by Aaron Trammell around its kind of Eurocentric and kind of Western kind of bias. But still, that principle of how play precedes culture or play creates cultures is really quite an attractive element to other disciplines that are perhaps looking for more experimental methods. So one of the things that we're doing, coming back to post-humanism next February, we're running a post-human summer lab where we're going to start playing in the city along the river. I'm going to take a train to an abandoned quarry in the Grampians, or sorry, near the Grampians, and experiment with that quarry as a site of possibility. So this is with 30 people in tents, playing with that space, and go to the ocean and explore that space. And this is deliberately staged as an interdisciplinary experiment. So it's using these methods to bring people who might not ordinarily work together to entangle them in ways of thinking and making that perhaps unfamiliar, and do that in a very intensive and playful way.
I think that's a better quote: entangling people in a more creative way of thinking. That's your quote. It's your official quote. The previous one was taken. Yeah, entangling
That's right.
people, interdisciplinary. That's wonderful. I think we're done with our questions. I think it's been just a wonderful conversation.
It's been fantastic.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Yeah, I've enjoyed it as well.